And it was fascinating to hear her soft analysis of Gail, Amna, Raphael, Kemraj, always first names, or how a motion or a bill should be approached and handled. Or after that, we will have quiet talks about the progress of our families, all quietly. Yet, in a nanosecond, with a loud hail up will be given to Neil or to Bibi. Debbie is now the company of the political and parliamentary giants and women's greats of the past. Those who have passed, like Janet Jagan, Jane Phillips Gay, and Margaret Ackman Judd. And now the board is down the ring. Goodbye, little board. Goodbye, Deborah Osborne Backer. Adios, Marquita Lindo. Allow me to congratulate Mr. Ashley Singh, the Finance Minister, for once more presenting a budget to this House, and also for his longevity to be able to survive so long in presenting budgets that are well known for their size rather than for their substance. Speaker, we keep hearing about the tax on this side of the House that we ought to be able to present alternative solutions to the projects and the ideas that the finance minister presents. Let me say that this is not the role of the opposition. It is the role and the duty of the government and the finance minister to come to us with projects. Our job is to help them to point out the areas where it can be improved, and that is exactly what we do when we stand up most and talk. It's not that we're attacking for the sake of attacking. It is because we have the nation at heart, that when we see something that is not exactly correct, or where it can be improved, or where money is being channeled and wasted, as we in the committees can attest to the areas of corruption that every week we point out at our committee level, that we stand up and we oppose or we point out what should not happen. It is not that we are against it. We want to see Guyana go forward. So, Mr. Minister, please understand how we think. I've already said on the radio that it takes 7 minutes for a man to fall asleep. If that is correct, then during the presentation of this budget, we would have fallen into that comatose state 25 times. The sustained and unusual silence on both sides of this House indicates the mighty struggle that was waged against that desire. The Attorney General and the AFC must have had advance notice. They took countermeasures. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister himself, a victim of the somnolent mood that he had induced, titled his budget "A Better Guyana for All Guyanese," when in fact he really meant to use the APNU's manifesto title, A Good Life for All Guyanese. When they say common events do cast. Right. Mr. Speaker, as in the past, once again, the presentation of this 2014 budget is without the active involvement of the mass-based party APNU and of that of the AFC. It exposes the trend of arrogance of this government, the contempt that they have for us, and lays bare the belief in their mantra that one party, their party, and their party alone can develop Guyana. Now, they come to us today hoping for an endorsement of something for which we did not participate, something for which the TUC, Labour, did not participate. How can you expect us to really endorse something for which we had no hand in crafting? How can you expect us not to want to attack you when we stand up here and you hear for the first time projects like that has never existed before? Money being voted for bridges, and when you can tell you, they can tell you areas like Linden Highway, you can't drive it. You can't see where you're going at nights. Every year we know that it's too dark to travel, and yet nobody stopped to say, rather than giving money for a hospital that is not ours, let us put some of that same money towards having a lighted highway. So they seek to yoke us to this budget that offers no meaningful relief to the poor, no increase in wages for workers, and no vision for good and accountable government. When you talk about 5% as being an increase, it's the same old that we had last year. When you talk about 5%, when we need to have 20% as the living wage, when we need to have discussions to know exactly what is the real living standard and the requirement, only then can you know whether a 5% is meaningful or not. And we can say right now, 5% can't work. We just ask. We're not here to quarrel. What we're asking you for is a return to the collective bargaining table so that you can involve unions and workers in what is best for them, and you would then really know what is required to pay them money that you can afford to pay. The money that you get that you're going to spend on the Milo, the money that you plan to spend on the airport, those billions can be redirected and channeled in such a way that the very workers who are today crying will be in a better position to live comfortably and yet look for better opportunities. Mr. Speaker, when we come to sugar, there are bailouts, that is the popular word and the mantra of this government. Bailout seems to be the quick resort for this government when it comes to their pet projects like sugar and even rice. When sugar loses, the solution is a bailout. And when rice makes a profit, the force of habit donates more money to more bailouts. Hence, when you hear that, they boast on one hand, they boast about the amount of rice that is going to be exported to Venezuela. And yet at the same time, you're talking about giving bailouts. How can I give bailout to a profitable institution? This is where we are saying on this side of the house that unless you talk to us, you might very well find yourself guilty of giving away the taxpayers' money. Professor Clive Thomas, in his Stabat newspaper, edition of 30th of March 2014, tables the annual losses of Besugo 2000 to 2009. We call it mired in a sea of losses and bailouts. The finance minister himself, in his 2011 budget speech at page 20, said to say that 2010 was a disappointing year for sugar, the sugar sector, would be an understatement of considerable proposals. Nothing has changed since then. The labor force still keeps leaving. in the sugar estates. Production still keeps falling. I will not color this the falling annual production figures at this point. I did that last year. Yet, Skeldon Estate, comrade, the color is getting whiter. And the government now wants to donate $6 billion. This is like throwing good money after bad. This we cannot accept under these conditions. Sir ATN, you offered solutions before last and last year for this industry. Our problem, comrades, is that when these solutions are offered, you seem to think that we just stand up and talk. Our side has offered in the past. Okay? Let me repeat some of them. Okay, get out your pen. Appoint a competent board of directors. That was one of the things we offered last year. Yeah, want to have that. Right now your directors are at sea. They will craft new policies, depoliticize the entity, and diversify production that you have. Instead of attacking us, we want to close down Gaisuku. Instead of slandering our names, that we want to close down. This is false. It is not so. But we are committed to the survival of sugar as any PPP government. Don't you ever forget, our ancestors were the bedrock of sugar in this country. The Speaker, nowhere in any previous budget have I found any gift of taxpayers' money donated to any industry that is making a profit, as I said before. But amazingly, rice, the flagship of success, with a guaranteed market, not only in Venezuela, but in the West Indies and Latin America on the horizon, has been awarded $500 million. Are we that rich to give handouts to places like GPL and not the rice, while we refuse to give living wages? Sir, the 2012 World Bank report stated that rated Guyana the third poorest in the Western Hemisphere, and the poorest in South America. If you have that poverty, what was our friend speaking about our progress and the money we're making, when these people have us pegged as the poorest in South America? I don't understand the World Bank 2012 report. Yes, so this is a bit confusing to me. I wouldn't say that I'm confused. We would like to see employment go up in Stanley. Mr. Ali was just telling us, regaling us with the numbers that we would have created. 600 jobs here, 200 jobs there, 300 jobs somewhere. So it gives the illusion to you that employment is being created, that people are being given jobs. But why then did the American government tell us that 49% youths are unemployed in this country? I do not even want to use those figures. I don't think as a Guyanese I ought to use the American.
Open your premise up. You have 5 minutes to conclude your presentation.
I do not wish to use those figures. If the government will then give us the unemployment figures for this country, then we will be able to do two things. We put whatever America says, and two, we can only then can we really measure whether jobs are being created or not. The GPL tells us that in this budget, that fuel prices remain high, and they have not increased tariffs for a long time. This scenario is painted to justify their allocation of $3.7 billion in 2013. In 2013. For this year, that year they got $11 million. And the year before they got $6 million. They are still to tell us in what way we are benefiting from those bailouts that they received in the past before they can go further. Yes, they have not told us. What they have not told us is that the 2013 IDB report pegged Guyana as having the highest cost of electricity in the Caribbean.
That's why you want hydro.
And yet they continue to deliver.
You've seen the light.
And yet they continue. And yet they continue.
You've seen the light.
Allow not to complete.
And yet they continue to deliver. Yet they continue to. Yet they continue to deliver unreliable service to consumers. We cannot support any request to bail out this entity.
That's why it's for
In the past, our solutions to GPL were rejected. No new directors, no new professional managers, no non-political people in place to reduce line, nothing to do to reduce line losses. Let us reintegrate the businessmen and bring down the rates of electricity at the highest level, and then you can know whether we can have any money to give to them. Sir, the cleanup campaign in Georgetown have left us dumbfounded. When we hear the minister admits that a serious sanitation problem abounds in the capital and other places, the blame for this disgrace must be placed at the foot of the ruling party. From 1994 to now, there has been a deliberate policy of willful neglect of the capital and the London states of MDCs and city councils at the walls of villages. What happened to the cleanup motion that was passed in this house? Why was nothing ever done? Why were all attempts by the city council to raise funds and to effectively manage the city stymied? Why are the outfalls not dredged to prevent flooding? Now $1 billion to clean the country at $500 million to Georgetown. Who will manage this money? For too long, citizens have suffered. We demand that the president assent to the local government bill. We are ready for local government elections, ready to recruit a qualified town clerk, ready to end micromanagement of the city and other local authorities. The election of people's representatives will deliver a clean city, a flood-free city, and usher in the role of local democracy. It will succeed where $1 billion will fail. Mr. Speaker, the tourism sector is yet to take off, even after spending money each year. Various schemes have been floated. One year we spent a lot of money talking about having Esquibo as a harbor for winter for yachts. I haven't seen any yet. You talk about watching. Are there yachts which come in winter here as was the scheme that you outlined? No. You talk about watching. How many people have arrived in this country to watch birds? Those birds are the different kind of birds. Nothing is being done.
How many of you will have to start wrapping up now? Please wrap.
I wish to warn people about the proposal that we intend to have a hospitality institute. I advise you to visit the Bahamas. Jamaica, and those other places that have tourism. And tell me whether, after you've seen what is the product of those institutes, whether you want your son and daughter to follow in the footsteps that you will see. I have seen it, and I will not comment on what you will find. But if you want it, go and see. And then come back and see what you want. Why not just have, why not think in terms of development? If you want tourism, find ways of encouraging Guyanese. I'm doing it now. Find ways of encouraging Guyanese.
Don't debate it. You don't have the time to go every little thing that is dangling in front of you.
Okay,
My
so
suggestion
as goes off
is stick to your script and wrap up your speech and make a point you intend to make.
This budget fails to address the crime of living wage for workers. It fails to bring pensioners the basic cash that will. We had asked for $15,000. We are still to get to that stage. And inflation is taking it even higher. By the time next year, you'll need $20,000 a month. And we demand that our attention to the old, the aged, and other places that given some attention. For as long as the poor continues to be marginalized, no amount of money spent on projects will deliver a prosperous and contented people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Honorable Reverend Kwame, Dr. Kwame.
Constrained by the fact that there is much that could be said and should be said about the measures that are outlined in this budget. But as we know, time is of essence, and I'm aware that my very capable colleagues over the next few days will elaborate extensively on the numerous measures allocated sectorially in this budget. So I shall endeavor to continue to a few thematic areas in the social sector. But I also wish to pause briefly and to say that with respect to the budget in totality, I would posit in one word that it is a visionary budget. Helen Keeler, a woman born blind, was asked the question, what is worse than being born blind? And she responded, to have sight but no vision. A vision, Mr. Speaker, is the ability to not just see things as they are, but as it could be. A vision is birthed in the tension between what is and what could become. And this budget, Mr. Speaker, takes cognizance of the present and points to the future. This budget recognizes the challenges of our present. It does not ignore the present. It recognizes the inadequacies and the impairments of our present, socially, economically, politically, and otherwise. But it dares to present a bold and ambitious roadmap of what must be done to move us as a nation from where we are to where we should be. And we have heard in the presentations that preceded statements being made that I believe identifies from the perspective of the honorable members some of those challenges as they see it. But what is of concern, sir, is that if we to examine the budget for what it really is, and every budget, not just this one, but every budget that preceded in the years before, no budget can be or should be seen or understood in the context of itself in isolation. Budget represents a continuity of an agenda, a roadmap that moves a nation from one place to another, economically, socially, and otherwise. And while, yes, the honorable members have identified a few things that they have seen as our present circumstances. What is ironic is that many of the very measures in the budget that is intended to address some of these very issues are ignored and will be voted against. And for me, that does not suggest that there is any kind of rational thinking that guides the action. And so I want to say, sir, that anyone who dares to diminish, cut, diminish, whichever word you want to use, this budget, both in size and significance, is saying to the Guyanese people, you do not deserve more, you deserve less. And so, Mr. Speaker, my question to our colleagues on the opposite side, which I would like to be answered is, are these measures, as presented by the Honorable Minister in this budget, intended to make the lives of our people better or worse? For those who would say worse and dare to ignore the evidence, let me remind our colleagues that there has not been one single area of budgetary reduction in this budget. In every sector, and my colleagues over the next few days will elaborate on these, but in every sector, we have seen, and consistent also with previous budgets, we have seen incremental increases in every sector that is intended to address the immediate and future needs of our people. Why, sir? Because our people deserve more. But in the social sector alone, the sector which deals with direct investments in our people through the provision of services, if my mathematics is correct, there's an allocation that exceeds over a third of the national estimates. And that, sir, is visionary. We have not even begun to talk about hydroelectricity. We've not begun to talk about the whole issue of investments in ICT and all of the other areas that is futuristic and visionary in its trajectory. We are talking about the social sector that gets services to our people. We have heard words used like bailouts and handouts and such adjectives that would suggest, I'm not quite sure if that is what the honourable member is trying to suggest, but if one were to take the descriptive adjectives offered about how this budget is described by the honourable member, it somehow would suggest that the government should leave any industry that requires their support to flounder and fail. I'm not quite sure why a responsible government, as this government, would see an industry requiring its support and not provide that support. So I'm not sure why there are such words like handouts and bailouts even being suggested or used. I'm not sure what the message is intended to convey. Because investments in our people is the most prudent of investments. I believe that our people deserve the very best. And so the allotment in the social sector represents this, the value that we place in our people. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, I have been reliably informed also that in a previous administration, prior to 1992, the budgetary allocations provided by a certain distinguished gentleman on the other side for the foreign ministry exceeded, for the foreign ministry alone, exceeded the amalgamated allocation for health, education, agriculture. That does not sound very visionary to me. So, that's a distinguished gentleman. So, the government of Guyana, through its consistent allocations to vulnerable groups and other targeted interventions, have continued to work unrelentingly to fight to eradicate the social bane and the economic burden of interpersonal and intimate partner violence. from our society. While the political will and the humanitarian compassion and commitment remains for the empowerment of our women, particularly for single parents, through the Single Parents Training Program, Guyana Women's Leadership Institute, Women at Worth Initiative, and the Honorable Minister later, I believe, will speak and elaborate greatly on these. There's also an equal commitment and resolve to pursue interventions and find solutions in transforming the social context of men being viewed, perceived as perpetrators of violence, to becoming partners in the fight against violence. And in this respect, it's important to note the several initiatives that have been undertaken to recognize, one, that our approach should not be just to vilify, that's the male section of our population, but to find ways in which we can help men to understand, one, why is that they find it necessary to respond violently in the context of conflicts in their relationships, and to provide opportunities for men to have interventions brought to them. And I'm speaking here in the context of those men who are prone to violence and those men who are in relationships where they are perpetrators of violence against their children and their spouse. To this end, the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security has embarked on a national gender-based violence initiative involving collaboration between the Men's, or not between, but amongst the Men's Affairs Bureau, the Child Care Protection Agency, Probation and Welfare Services, just to name a few. And this initiative, sir, is an outreach, I've been told, to schools, both public and private, NGOs, to the NOC, the Opportunity Corps, youth groups, and also working with CBOs, community-based organizations. There is an initiative being contemplated currently, drawing on a model observed in Grenada, where the perpetrators of domestic violence are sent to be a part of a perpetrator accountability program, where they have to, I think, complete in excess of maybe 160 sessions, I think, something to that nature. I rather suspect that this is a very valuable intervention. Additionally, the government of Guyana, under the auspices of this ministry, as Ministry of Human Services, continues to demonstrate its support for the role and the value of the family as the fundamental pillar in human society. And as such, through the work of the National Commission of the Family, they have conducted several parenting workshops across the country, and even as we speak, work is being done to design a special curriculum aimed at educating men to be more effective in their roles as fathers and husbands. Mr. Speaker, again, I must reiterate that this budget is a budget of vision. Time would not permit me to speak in great detail of the developmental work being done by the Child Care and Development Services Regulations, or the Child Care and Protection Agency, or to elaborate on the over 2,000 children who were prevented from being separated from their families in 2013, or the 519 children that were removed from abusive situations. And the Minister will elaborate, I believe, on many of those. But the programs and the initiatives targeting vulnerable groups and populations, including our children, being primary in them, cannot underscore the need, or cannot underestimate the need, for us to, as a National Assembly, to recognize the importance of the allocations made to the social sector. But one must conclude, in view of all of these critical interventions, which can be, and which have also been for the good of our nation's children, that this budget in its present form, with its allocations, with its measures, is a visionary one. Our youths also are beneficiaries of this budget in very, very significant ways, and I will not seek to take away anything from the Honorable Minister of Sports as he speaks later, except to say that I think it is useful to note of the great benefits in 2013 as it relates to training under the NTPYE program, the apprenticeship program, the Youth Entrepreneurial Skills Training Programs. But just to touch quickly on the fact that the government's commitment to equitability and opportunity will ensure that in 2014 we will see the commencement of a hinterland training program expected to target 150 persons in Region 9. And this is significant because, as you know, there is always the view that much of the interventions are concentrated on the coast. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister will later on elucidate on the national pride and the benefits of the athletic track at Lenora and the National Aquatic Centre at Liliendal, and some of the other things that we have done and will continue to do as deliberate interventions to impact our youth in this nation. And there's no need for me to say further except to say that our friends on the other side of this House will have great difficulty in miniaturizing these national landmarks as symbols of the value that we place in our nation's youth. And so we may want to simply to say, well, there isn't much there. While I agree with the Honourable Mr. Scott that their responsibility is to point out areas of deficiencies, we also have a moral responsibility to recognize when there are benefits there and not seek to miniaturize them simply to be political. This budget does not lay claim to being the solution to all of our social and economic challenges. This budget is in no way a panacea to our social, economic, or political difficulties. But I am confident that it is a visionary roadmap which recognizes our immediate challenges, but points to a future that is pregnant with boundless potentials and possibilities for the development of our country. And so, permit me, sir, to share a little story. You know, it's interesting, last evening
You have 4 minutes within which to...
I am about to conclude, sir. Thank you very much. Last evening, I took a friend of mine for a little tour around the city. He lived for many years in Canada. And he was very, well, not shocked. Shocked, I think, is a little too extreme. But he could not help gushing about the level of development that he has seen in his few days in returning to Guyana. I think it would be very unpatriotic, sir, for anyone who live here to look at our development and simply say that nothing has happened. But I will tell you a little story as I conclude. There were two men standing at the window looking out. Two men standing at the window looking out. One saw stars and the other saw mud. You may ask, how is that possible, sir? Because one was looking up and one was looking down. It is all about perspective, sir. I wonder, therefore, what my colleagues on the other side are seeing. Thank you very much.
Member Mr. Bokan. Mr. Bokan, on about 5 o'clock, I will just inquire from you whether you would wish to conclude or whether you would advise that we take a suspension. But the decision will be yours.
I prefer to conclude yours.
Very well. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to the motion before us. The one standing in name of the Honorable Member, Dr. Ashni Kumar Singh, Minister of Finance, and which seeks the approval of this Honorable House for the spending of $205+ billion. Urging that in making our presentation, we be competitive and not destructive. If you were quoted accurately, your exhortation was that we put aside petty, personal, and partisan differences and put Guyana first. The latter, that is to avoid being personal, is easy to comply with. The former, however, is not quite so simple. As this is serious business we are engaged in, and to this I'll say that I owe it to myself, but moreover to the many thousands of our countrymen and women who have sent me and my colleagues here to robustly represent their interests. My fallen comrade would have wanted this too, and I think of her as I make my contribution. Matter of fact, the minister himself expected this, and in his speech predicted that his budget will come under the microscope, or in his words, will be dissected from every imaginable perspective. However inadequate it may be, I too have a perspective, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is true that a budget is about money, or moreover, numbers. It is even more true, though, that the figures before us did not fall from the sky, nor were they randomly plucked from a sack, but rather are informed by a philosophy and tell of the priorities of the government. It is because of my firm belief of the significance of the foregoing that I choose to spend time addressing and assessing this question before turning to some of the figures. With regard to the philosophy that underpins this budget and the Minister's observation that Budget 2014 is the largest budget ever, and having assessed the proposed allocations, I am reminded of my colleague, Honorable Member, Mr. Williams' plaintive cry in 2013, in his 2013 budget presentation, when he pointedly asked, bigger for whom? The masses or a small cabal? The minister boasts of economic growth, but when we go into communities across our country, as we have been doing the past 26 months, we have to ask, where is the development and where are the jobs? Mr. Speaker, the income and wealth disparity continues to widen within the society, and dangerously so. The poor, both employed and unemployed, are being left behind, and their ranks are swelling. This budget does not present a vision to correct the structural imbalance of the economy and to show the way to the good life which our people deserve. Mr. Speaker, the economy is highly dependent, some may say unhealthily so, on just two industries, these being gold and rice, with gold accounting for 47% of total 2013 exports and rice 17.5%. Together, they account for 2/3 of all exports. This reliance is not expected to change in 2014. And the minister's projections show gold exports to remain at 47% and rice marginally less at 16%, again representing almost 2/3 of total exports. Yet the minister speaks of transforming the economy and of progress made in diversification, but figures don't lie. Should we as a nation be concerned about this, Mr. Speaker? I say we should. I am no prophet of doom, but the simple truth is that no one can predict the future world market price of gold, and it is unwise to plan an economy on so tenuous a foundation. What is going to happen to the many thousands who now depend on this industry to feed themselves and their families should gold prices head south? Where is the cushion going to come from to save them from possible indignity? Mr. Speaker, it is because a budget is not a bookkeeping exercise, but rather an executive function or responsibility that I am spending time looking at this document, which promises a better Guyana from this perspective, as opposed to focusing on the minutiae or the numbers contained in it. In any event, we will have 7 days to scrutinize each line item. Let me look briefly, therefore, to the sugar industry. The minister informs us that the government has injected $9.7 billion into this industry over the past 2 years. And Budget 2014 seeks the approval of this House to transfer a further $6 billion to Gaisuco. And what is the basis for this request? Let me do not interpret or paraphrase the minister, but rather quote him directly. These are the minister's words accompanying his request for a further $6 billion, and I quote, "With the soon-to-be appointed new board of directors and senior management, and the injection of more innovative thinking into both the strategic and operational challenges that continue to beset the industry, and a more harmonized industrial climate, the emergence of a revitalized sugar industry is anticipated." End of quote. APNU has previously expressed our concern at the massive transfers to Gaisuco, as well as the GPL, in the absence of a bipartisan agreement on appropriate reform proposals. In the absence of this, we see these transfers as a handout. In the meantime, the industry produces less and less, and last year exported a mere $112 million US. There are actually contradictory figures in the speech, because under Appendix 5, the figure of 114 million is given. The minister may wish to correct this and decide which one is correct. Or less than 20% of gold exports, and the projections for this year is for it to earn even less, or US dollars 103.3 million. Mr. Speaker, this cooperation has produced so many so-called turnaround plans in the past decade that one industry expert has opined that it is in danger of getting I-turned. In the meantime, the minister is seeking to transport us to utopia, and himself has donned the cap of Voltaire's character Pangloss. There's rhetoric and there's reality. As for the rice industry, Mr. Speaker, the figures give cause for even more concern. Sales of rice and paddy under the Petro-Caribe arrangement for the period July 2011 to January 2014 total $336.5 million US, which represents 77% of total rice exports in 2012 and 2013. Mr. Speaker, given current events and political instability in Venezuela, no one can be certain that these arrangements will remain in place in the long term. In the absence of other available markets, the potential for dislocation and disruption to this industry is real. So while the minister boasts, when we are in government, we will get more markets. So while the minister boasts of economic growth, macroeconomic stability, and of diversification, the economy has a structural imbalance. Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development. Yes. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention to this ministry, what is now a mega ministry. The first thing we need to establish is what is supposed to be the role of this ministry, and to see if its actions are consistent with same. Its role is defined, or more like circumscribed by the Constitution, and in particular, three of its articles. These are Article 75, which says the Parliament shall provide that local democratic organs shall be autonomous and take decisions which are binding upon their agencies and institutions, and upon the communities and citizens of their areas. Article 77 reads that the development program of each region shall be integrated into the national development plans, and the government shall allocate funds to each region to enable it to implement its development program. And Article 77A, which says that Parliament shall by law provide for the formulation and implementation of objective criteria for the purpose of the allocation of resources to and the garnering of resources by local democratic organs. In conjunction with the foregoing, we have to refer to the Fiscal Transfers Act, which was passed in this House in August of last year and assented to by the President in November of 2013. Mr. Speaker, Clause 6.2 of this Act states, and I quote, that in arriving at the determination of the annual subvention from central government to local authorities, it is acknowledged that central government has a responsibility to provide financial resources to local authorities to supplement their own revenues and in order to assist them to discharge their functions and responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, there are 81 of such local democratic organs. Mr. Speaker, my friend, if you listen, you will learn. 10 of these are regional democratic councils. There are 10 regional democratic councils, 6 municipalities, and 65 NDCs. And the Constitution says that they shall be autonomous, which means having the freedom to govern themselves and to act independently. The role of this ministry, therefore, is to provide support to these 81 democratically elected councils, not to seek to suffocate them, and certainly not to undermine or marginalize them as is currently happening. While the Constitution states that these councils shall be autonomous, the central government is using its steel heel via REOs, clerks in the case of our municipalities, and overseers in the case of NDCs to subvert the authority of these organs in a naked display of despotism. The equivalent of this would be a permanent secretary exercising more authority than his or her subject minister, or of all of the permanent secretaries as a collective dictating to the cabinet. This is the absurdity of what prevails with regards to local democracy and the functioning of local democratic organs. It is the government which is refusing to hold local government elections to have the life of these councils renewed. Yet, the minister comes to this house and uses incendiary and unbecoming language like comatose to describe these bodies. Mr. Speaker, the minister seeks $1 billion to fund a program he refers to as a cleanup campaign, which in his words will be spearheaded by the government. It is clear from the minister's speech that this allocation will not be given to the various councils as the law requires, but rather the intention is for it to be dispersed directly by the government and its collaborators. This is an invidious initiative and one designed to make the existing councils look bad. Its purpose can be only to score political points. It represents the height of lawlessness. It is not really about a clean-up campaign. It is part of an elections campaign. Instead of being part of the solution, the government chooses to be part of the problem. Mr. Speaker, let us examine the allocations to this mega ministry for 2012 to now. And I'm looking at just current expenditure, which represents employment costs and something which is referred to as other charges. No capital expenses, Mr. Speaker. In 2012, the allocation was 278 million. In 2013, 325 million. And in 2014, 333 million. Under programs 131, 132, and 133. When we look at the stated objectives for the respective programs, we begin to appreciate how misguided the government is. Program 131, main office. Mr. Speaker, the program objective described in the budget, this is what it says. To ensure the successful implementation of the ministry's plans, policies, and development programs in accordance with here, good governance, facilitated infrastructure, and human resource development in the regions. Incidentally, Mr. Speaker, this program has a total staff of 17 persons, and every one of them are contracted employees. But that's a different story. Mr. Speaker, local government is about local democracy. It is not about what central government wishes. That was perhaps the old construct prior to the enactment of the 1980 Constitution and of the strengthened provisions relating to local government in the amendments of 2001. I've already related Articles 75 and 77, which provides for local democratic organs to be autonomous and that the government is obligated to allocate funds to each region, as well as other local organs, to enable them to implement their development program. But the government, you will have your turn, madam. You will be able to answer. But the government comes to this house and says it wants money to implement the ministry's development program. Here we have one unit undermining and subverting the authority of 81 statutory authorities. 81 statutory bodies. Centralist perversity. This degrading of the authority of local democratic organs does not stop there. There's a whole parallel structure that now forms part of this unlawful framework. And here I'm referring to the overwhelming authority of public agencies. Among these being the Sea Defense, NDIA, Lands and Surveys, EPA. In local communities, the experience is that they exercise enormous authority without any duty or obligation to consult with local democratic organs in dispensing national resources or direct local ones to their friends. The government has recently added to this mischief with another body under its control called anti-litter regulations. With litter wardens doing what is a job for local democratic organs. This addiction to control is immoral, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this budget proposes an allocation of $795 million under line item 1900-400, with the executing agency being the Ministry of Finance. The project description.
Honourable members, it is unfair to Mr. Bulkan for an sub-debate to be going on over his head.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Speaker, this budget proposes allocation of $795 million under line item 1900-400, with the executing agency being the Ministry of Finance. The project description shows that it is for interventions in communities countrywide. There is something called a poverty program, with a proposed allocation of $725 million. This program, we are told, is to provide support to vulnerable groups through community development programs and projects. And there's a youth initiative program with a budget of $69 million. Again, we are told for small community-driven infrastructure projects. So right here we have allocations totaling $1,589 million, almost $1.6 billion, for community projects to to be executed by another central government body. And what is the capital subvention for 71 local government organs? Mr. Speaker, it is $359 million, or less than 1/4 of this single component under the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Speaker, in response to parliamentary questions asked by my colleague, Mrs. Lawrence, we learned that for 2013 allocations under this so-called poverty program, $15 million was given as support to the National Director of something called the Community Development Council, CDC. Unless I am mistaken, the National Director of this body is Ms. Philomena Sahoy Shuri, also known as Fireball. I do not know if this so-called CDC is a statutory body, as it does not exist in any of the local government legislation, namely chapters 2801, 2802, or 2809. But why should we have a CDC when there are already 81 statutory bodies which are being underfunded? What I do know is that the CDC director has been going about the country assisting in dismantling elected bodies, that is NDCs, and replacing them with appointed ones, or IMCs. This is not a fireball, Mr. Speaker. This is more like a wrecking ball. Among the activities under the poverty program was $71 million through the Public Works Ministry to clean up sections of Georgetown. $16 million for the now infamous San Jose Bridge in Maruca, which I believe my colleague, Mr. Harman, will speak about, and $54 million to host the National Two Shelves Council meeting in October of last year. Of course, much of the NTC meeting was devoted to bashing and vilifying the majority of this House. Mr. Speaker, this program is aptly titled, as it is named, Poverty Program, and not Anti-Poverty Program. It is being used, however, as a massive slush fund. Mr. Speaker, the problem gets worse. In 2001, the Constitution was revised and new provisions were introduced, as I said earlier, to strengthen local democracy. One of the new constitutional articles is 78A, which requires the establishment of a local government commission. The article reads as follows: Parliament shall establish a local government commission, the composition and rules of which empower the commission to deal with, as it deems fit, all matters related to the regulation and staffing of local government organs, and with dispute resolution within and between local government organs. It took the PPP Civic 12 years for the legislation to be enacted to allow for this entity to come into being. It finally happened in August of last year with passage of the relevant bill, and which received presidential assent in early November 2013. This act, however, is waiting on a commencement order from the subject minister for its operationalization. Even though it is 13 years since the Constitution dictated that we have this body, the minister is unmoved and apparently unconcerned. The budget speech makes no mention of funding for this important constitutional entity designed to professionalize and depoliticize the management of communities. Instead, the budget speaks of bypassing the statutory responsibility of local government bodies and for central government to spearhead the cleaning up of communities. Mr. Speaker, the government is making a mockery of democracy. Mr. Speaker, the phenomenon of which I speak is real, not imaginary. And I can assure you that my surname is Volcan, not Quilty. Mr. Speaker, let us look at how central government actions are leading to underdevelopment in the regions and to hardship for our people. I will use Region 8 as an example. And what happens there applies to all 10 regions. But particularly regions where the PPP does not have a majority on the RDC. The action that I refer to is that of sidelining the RDC from administering the affairs of the region as prescribed by the Constitution. In 2012, $8 million was approved under line item 240-2200. $5 million of which we were told was to purchase a Bedford Model M truck to be used for health services in the region, as well as to take Region 8, as well as to take drugs into the region. 2 years on, there is no evidence of this truck, and the Health Committee of the RDC has not been given any information as to why this is so. It is suspected that what was bought was another pickup, PRR 3520. I have pictures of them here. For exclusive use of the REO. Even though he had a perfectly functioning vehicle, PNN 9505. Both of the vehicles are here. A truck for the benefit of the region or a new status symbol for the REO. The question has been asked, who is the benefit from these bigger and bigger budgets? The masses or a privileged few? The philosophy seems to be, to him that hath shall be given. Meanwhile, we are advised that the region's vehicles are being used to do party political work. In last year's budget, money was approved for teachers' quarters at Paramakatoy. I was there last week as part of an APNU team that visited the North Paparaimas. And residents there complained of this incomplete facility and the effects of students not having trained teachers at the secondary school. This time, both the works and education committees are ignored. Sidelined. Again in 2013 budget, $12 million was voted for an ambulance for the Madhya Hospital. This ambulance is yet to arrive. There's clearly no urgency. A 4x4 double cab cruiser was bought last year, ostensibly for education. This vehicle, PRR 7145, this is another one here, Mr. Speaker, is mainly being used by the engineer, and it is reported that many nights it is parked at the said engineer's home after a night of cavorting.
Be careful. You are speaking about identifiable law. So be very careful. I would ask that you withdraw.
Okay, Speaker, I will draw this. And what is the transportation provided for the head of this region, the regional chairman? Here it is, Mr. Speaker. A fully air-conditioned motorbike. Central government's message is clear. And it is that they will handicap the statutory body and empower their officers. It is happening all over the country. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Member, Mrs. Gorita Lowe, recently received answers to questions she posed concerning vehicles PKK 2288 and PLL 6278. These questions were repeatedly asked by the regional chairman to the former minister and to the REO, but he was never accorded the respect of a reply. In any event, Mr. Speaker, $2 million was spent on PKK 2288 and approximately $1.4 million on PLL 6278, both in 2012. The thing is, Mr. Speaker, is that PKK 2288 never returned to the region. It seems like it was lost like the Malaysian Airlines, Mr. Speaker. Malaysian aircraft. And since its repairs, or its so-called repairs, PLL 6278 never worked properly. There's a picture of PLL 6278. Mr. Speaker, as the supply of pure water is not being delivered to residents in many parts of the region, despite what the honorable member said a short while ago, due to insensitivity and incompetence on the part of the government and its appointed officers, while elected officials are shut out from their lawful role of administering the region's affairs. Perhaps the most galling problem, though, concerns electricity supply to Madia, the administrative center of the region, and where residents presently receive a maximum of 12 hours daily and have to pay $100 per kilowatt hour. In this budget, the sum of $208 million is sought for power supply in Madia, Matthews Ridge, and Linden. Later, we will learn how much of this is, it says Linden, the estimates. With the estimates. Later, we will learn how much of this is designated for Madia. But what is certain is that it will represent a band-aid when a win-win solution, as well as a permanent one, is already there. I refer to the Chumari hydroelectric plant, on which a test run in 2012 established it to be functional.
Honourable member, your time is up. You will require an extension of 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the honourable member be given 15 minutes to continue his presentation.
While the government has entered into a contract with a private promoter who has the know-how for the lease of this facility, as well as a power purchase agreement, the contractor has so far been unable to raise the financing for the full rehabilitation of the power plant and to run the transmission line to Madia, mainly due to the unavailability of developmental capital locally. I say that given the importance of electricity and the presence of this facility in the region, there can be no valid reason why the government could not have found a way to see the facility become operational by way of a simple equity contribution and to benefit thousands of persons by fostering development as well as job creation. Mr. Speaker, a mere $30 million would have been sufficient, and not by way of a handout, but as I have said, an equity contribution. We recall that massive concessions and incentives were given for Cricket World Cup in 2008, but it appears that the residents of Region 8 are second-class citizens. This is why residents there have told me that they believe they are a part of apartheid. While we await to hear from government spokespersons why they could not have intervened to raise people's living standards, I point them to Article 16 of the Constitution, which says that the state shall foster the development of such relevant forms of cooperation and of business entities as are seen to be supportive of the goals of economic development. Mr. Speaker, we must not cherry-pick those parts of the Constitution that suits our purposes. I can see no impediment to government's intervention in a case such as this. The point, Mr. Speaker, is that were the RDC engaged in the way the Constitution specifies, this would have been a priority project for funding, and long before today, the residents from Mango Landing all the way to Madia would have had access to continuous and reliable supply of electricity at about half the price they are currently paying. Mr. Speaker, once more I say the problem is worse than what I've outlined so far. When the allocations are approved, the RDC is shut out from the award of contracts. Further parliamentary questions from Mrs. Louisa Lowe finally revealed the contracts awarded in 2012 and 2013. In 2012, 96 were awarded, and in 2013, a total of 102 for all types of works throughout the region. These contracts were awarded by a central government body called the Regional Tender Board, from which elected officials of the RDC were excluded. This is the aberration that the government practices. I say shame on you. That's right. Mr. Speaker, Guyana is a large country And it cannot be effectively or efficiently managed from the center in the absence of meaningful engagement with the 10 regional governments. It is dangerous to try and craft a national budget from Main Street, and such an approach will fail. So ingrained is the disrespect for local democracy and local government bodies that these estimates have not been given to the regional chairman that I have spoken with. I suspect that we might be told that they have to wait until after the estimates are approved for them to be given copies. But I maintain that this is the height of disrespect. Mr. Speaker, in my 2013 budget rebuttal, I urged that what is needed
Sit along, please. Honorable members, Mr. Burkan needs not only to finish, but to be heard. Begging.
I urge that what is needed is a comprehensive approach to the needs of the region and the hinterland communities. But that this task has to be approached from the bottom up, not from the top down. In other words, the regional governments have to be meaningfully engaged to identify their priorities, not what currently obtains, which is central government unilaterally deciding what hinterland communities will receive, such as inadequate network without internet connectivity, when young people cannot even get jobs. We have to find out who are actually benefiting from these interventions, the suppliers of goods or the hinterland residents. Seeking to place hinterland economies on a sustainable path has to be a priority of any government if we are to do justice to the expectations of our people and afford them a good life. I also then called on the government, as I previously did in 2012, to cease the invidious practice of breaching provisions of the Constitution. I do so again, Mr. Speaker. Projects and interventions in the regions must not be the sole responsibility of a handful of unelected officials. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret that the combined opposition was not engaged in the crafting of this budget. Yet the minister bemoans and decries what he refers to as legislative stalemate and of its debilitating consequences. But when required to make good on their own obligation, what is the government's responsibility? What is the government's response? It's here.
Dr. Sen, could you allow the member to speak, please?
What is their response, Mr. Speaker? It's here on the cover of the budget. Refer to this copy here on the right. What it says is that we will do it our way. Had the APNU been consulted, there are many areas of concern that we would have engaged the government on. Some of the priority areas to be addressed include job creation, training, education, and health access, the high level of taxation, and the inequitable burden being borne by some segments. We would have wanted to see that there are transparent arrangements to ensure that the resources of the state are appropriately and fairly managed and distributed, concerned as we are over the unacceptably low standards to which financial management is deteriorated. All issues include operation of the consolidated fund, I refer to the withholding of deposits to it, disposal of state assets, granting of fiscal concessions, and the award of contracts. The inadequacy of the regulatory framework, and which led, for example, to the CLICO fiasco with severe consequences for the NIS. The absence of national buy-in of key capital projects and the criteria and rationale for the overall program. Projects, as we've already heard, such as Amila, CGIA terminal building, Marriott Hotel, the Hope Canal, 4-lane extension, to a Diamond, and to Better Hope. The need for a social and political audit on NCM by an independent entity. The operation of GGMC as an independent institution. The need for an independent broadcast authority, and that discussion would necessarily involve the scandal of what is known as the spectrum giveaway. The list is long, Mr. Speaker, but my time is up. So finally, Mr. Speaker, if it is that the whole is the sum of its parts, then how can you have a product where main components are missing? Which is meaningful engagement with the majority of members in this House, as well as the 10 regional governments. This budget, therefore, cannot fly. It has terminal defects with regards to good governance, accountability, transparency, and respect for the Constitution. There will have to be modifications to it. The minister will have to go again, will have to go and come again. Thank you.